Hello guys, I'm here again today to talk about a fairly new game, that being Rule the Waves 3, which came out last year. Now, I've played Rule the Waves 2 a fair bit in the past, but I've only recently picked up Rule the Waves 3. If you don't know too much about this series, this is a tactical strategy game focused on naval combat and fleet design of the 20th century, especially like the early and mid 20th century, with the game going all the way from the late 19th century, about 1890, to about 1970 in the late 20th century. Now, you can play a lot of different nations in this game. You can play the main character of history, that being Great Britain, or one of the side characters like France or Russia, or even some of the comic relief like Italy. You take on the role of something like the First Lord of the Admiralty, or whatever the equivalent is in whatever nation, in terms of being able to design and build ships, decide naval doctrine, set missions, and so on relating to the kind of naval grand strategy of your nation. However, there's also the tactical aspect as well, where you can take on the role of like a fleet commander or even like a particular captain of one ship in like a specific battle in order to personally lead the ships in combat. Now, there's a few kind of degrees of control you can use. For example, you might just be kind of playing the role of an admiral, doing really broad tactical maneuvers, tactical control over the force you're commanding, or you can take like the very micromanaging captaincy role where you're actually controlling every single ship. Now, this game kind of exists in a weird parallel universe out of out of Winston Churchill's Wet Dream, where for some reason all the aspects of geopolitics are decided by Navy and the naval force. Meanwhile, the Army or really anything else is totally secondary. So be warned if you're like a landlubber tanky cuck and you don't like boats, because this is like the boat game for Atlantean Ubermensch only. Either way, guys, so let's kind of move on and take a look at the game here first. Alright, so when we start the game, we have a few options of years to choose from. As I said, this goes from 1890, this is the earliest start date, and you can choose up to 1935. However, the game actually continues onwards into the mid and late 20th century around, like I said, like 1970 or 1975, I think is like the latest date. So you can go all the way from the really wonky-ass pre-Dreadnought era with some really weird ship designs.
Uh-oh. Stinky.
To something more modern, which you'd see like even more modern designs of ships, like carriers, missile cruisers, submarines, and things like that. So you have a pretty broad range of things, and what you choose kind of decides a lot about the game. Now, you can play the game like a grand campaign all the way from 1890 to 1970, but that'd probably take a long time. But I mean, you could do it if you want. Each era you start in is kind of different, and I think they all play a little bit differently. For example, 1890. Let's click 1890 here. These are the nations you can choose from. Now, the nations are more or less the same in each era. They might change in terms of like the politics. For example, eventually Russia becomes the Soviet Union and so on, and Germany becomes like Nazi Germany or whatever. But aside from that, they're basically the same nation throughout the every option you choose from. Now, each era is a little bit different. For example, in the 1890 start, you're pretty basic in terms of your technology. You're basically at the bottom of the tech tree. As I said, you have these like pre-dreadnoughts. If you know much about naval history, which you don't really need to know much about naval history or anything for this game. I mean, you can enjoy it even if you don't know anything about like battles or ship design or whatever or anything like that. But basically, in the pre-dreadnought era, the kind of pre-modern battleships, there were very like funny and weird kind of designs, especially if you see any kind of French battleships. But either way, like the early era, it's pretty basic to start, and it can be kind of funny. I personally don't like the 1890 start as much. I mean, it's pretty fun because you can make some really wonky ass designs, but I generally think the 1900 start is a bit easier for like a new player, and generally the most like balanced start. 1920 is obviously after the First World War. You start getting a lot of the new technology, like the first carriers coming online, first airplanes, first submarines, things like that. So a lot of the new technology is just starting to come out in like 1920. This is also the era of the Washington Naval Treaty. If you know much about naval history, this is a treaty between a lot of the big naval powers after World War I, where they set hard limits on, like how big the fleet could be, how big the ships could be in terms of displacement. And this was a big reason why a lot of nations pushed towards carriers, because you can make a much lighter, faster ship and still have it be very destructive if it's a carrier rather than maybe like an older battleship, like a big dreadnought style battleship of the 1900s. And then 1935 is kind of like the World War II, lead up to World War II. We can see here, if I go here, you can see some of the nations have changed a little bit. For example, Austria-Hungary has vanished. You have Nazi Germany, you have Soviet Union, you have fascist Italy. Is Spain fascist here yet? No, I guess not, because they haven't had the revolution yet. And this game doesn't exactly follow real life history in terms of like what nations will happen. For example, Spain, if I play Spain in like 1935, it may not ever become fascist. So, you know, you can't really expect that. And then again, you could also have other nations have like a revolution and become wonky. Like, for example, you can have in Rule the Waves 2, I had a revolution in France where France had like a ridiculous socialist government. Even though obviously that didn't happen in real life, it just plays into different things in the game, which I'll talk about a little bit later. You can see some other nations have changed. For example, you have the Empire of Japan, you have Chinese Republic, and so on. So either way, like I said, I think 1900 start is probably the best. But before we go into here, I'm going to talk a little bit about how you actually play this game. So let me go into a game I was already playing. Now, looking at this, it could be a little bit daunting. Definitely this game is a very daunting game. When you look at it, when you think about this game, I mean, this is a game, like, I remember before I had first played it, I had seen pictures of people playing it, and I was kind of like, oh, you know, a little bit turned off at first. I mean, I do like really deep and kind of strategy games like this, and I don't really care about graphics that much. I mean, some of my favorite games are like the old Hearts of Iron games, like Darkest Hour, which is pretty basic graphically, but obviously this is a big step down from that even. But still, once you get the hang of it, it's actually not that difficult, I find. I mean, it looks probably more intensive than it is. But like, this is a game I've been playing as Italy just recently. Italy is probably one of my favorite nations to play, even though I was making a joke about it earlier. Italy is actually quite fun to play. You start in the Mediterranean, which, you know, is like Mare Nostrum, our sea, so you kind of can just focus on this sea only. You don't really have to worry about like colonies all over the world or kind of international engagements. You can really make a super tailored force and concentrate all of your power in this one little ocean, which is nice. This is the 1890 start, so I'm using kind of some wonky ships. Let me see if I have any ships made already. Let's see what's in service. Let's see. I have one. What's one of my ships? This is one I designed myself. It looks kind of wonky, but this is generally a little bit better, I think, than the pre-built ships. When you first start a game in the 1890 start, you start with a bunch of these really crazy pre-built ships that all kind of suck. I mean, it's kind of fun because basically every nation starts with them too, and you kind of have to work around with what you got. And I guess it is kind of thematic in that way, in that a lot of nations had really crazy, wonky-looking fleets in the late 18th century. You can design your own ships, of course, and generally they're a little bit more difficult to design the early low-tech ships than it is the later ones, because the type of designs are very weird, and I'll talk about that later. But I'll just go into some basics about ship design in a minute. But either way, I'm going to exit out of this game. You can see I'm at war here, and I'll come back to this game in a little while and show you a little bit about actually fighting a battle and things like that. But let's go into a little bit about ship design. So for example, if I want to build a ship, you can see there's a lot of buttons available here. I'm going to go actually to the build ship menu, or I should say the design ship menu. I have to design a ship before I can build it. So I can design whatever type of ship I want. You know, I can go to ship type and select some different options about like what type of ship. Now, not all these ships I have researched yet. For example, the Dreadnought battleship, I can't actually build that yet because I don't have this researched. I have to research things as things go along, which I'll talk about a little bit more later. But for example, if I want to build a ship, I might go, for example, pre-Dreadnought. And I can actually do everything by hand if I really want to, but to make it a bit easier, you can click this little picture of a computer, and it will auto-design a ship for you. Now, this is not always good. I mean, it's probably okay, I guess. I mean, it works. Basically, this is a ship ready to go. If you're kind of lazy and you don't want to do it yourself, you can just do that, and it'll be, like, okay. But definitely is worth taking some time to design it yourself, and I'll go over what you should actually think about when you're designing a ship. But like I said, if you just are kind of lazy, you can just do something like that. Auto design whatever ship. Oops, what happened? Okay, there we go. So yeah, you can auto design like some ship, and you'll get something okay out of that. I mean, this is kind of wonky too, so I'd have to add some guns. For example, the ship has no guns, which is not very good. But let's exit out of here for a second, and I'll go into a little bit more detail about what all these things mean and what it means to actually design the ship. And I'll specifically using my 1890s game as Italy as an example. Alright, so here's an example of a ship that I had built. This is one of the ships I showed before. The Lepanto class is a pre-dreadnought battleship, like an early battleship I designed myself. Now, there's a lot of things. I'm specifically looking at this section of the screen, which shows not only a representation of your ship in the left here, it also shows the armor stats for it, as well as a few other things as well, like how much money it's going to cost, how much it weighs, and so on. So let's specifically talk about the armor first, because I think this can be a bit confusing for people if they don't know what all these things mean. For example, what is belt, what is deck, what is turret, and so on like that. I included this picture on the right here, which makes it a little bit easier to understand what each area of armor is actually talking about. For example, the belt. I have belt 7, means about 7 inches. Everything's in inches. This is like an American game, so you have to deal with the American measurements here. But belt specifically means this area of the ship, about kind of like the middle of the ship, and specifically along the waterline, above and below the waterline. So this is the belt, and this should usually be the thickest part of the ship, especially in early battleships. A lot of the fighting is going to be fairly close up, and a lot of the gunnery is going to be hitting you in the side rather than on top or anything like that. As the time goes on, the engagements are going to be a bit further and further. Basically, the guns are going to get better quality. They'll be able to hit you from farther away. And you want to focus more on like deck armor, because instead of the ships broadsiding you like, I don't know, like a wooden frigate or a battleship like that, just blasting the side of your ship, they're going to start lobbing rounds above you and coming down on top of you. So later you might want more deck armor, but for now, basically, this is pretty important, the belt, this area. Next, you have the belt extended, which is this light blue area on my diagram here. And here I only have a little bit of belt extended armor. Basically, that covers the kind of front and back area of the ship. Now, these areas are not as important. Kind of when you're designing a ship, whatever era, you really want to focus on the parts of the ship that have the most important stuff. So, for example, this whole middle of the ship has like all your important weapons, ammo, have your general staff, like the captain, all the important stuff is basically in the middle here. So you really want to focus on this area first, and the other areas are kind of like extra. You can even go like nothing on these areas too if you really want to. Next, you have the upper belt. I didn't label on this one, but that's basically just above. If you look at this dark blue line, the part just above that, from there to the deck, is the upper belt. Now, it's not really modeled here, but that would be like raising the belt upwards a little bit, making it a little bit thicker. You have the deck extended, which again is the front and back of the ship. The main deck is just the middle part where you have all your superstructure and turrets and stuff like that. You have the conning tower, that's like the command center where your commander is, so you do want to protect that so your general staff and captain don't get blown up. You have the turrets. The turrets are your main guns. Basically turrets means your biggest guns of the ship, your main guns. And you kind of want that to be more or less equivalent to the belt, or at least fairly strong. This is probably the other area we want fairly good armor. The belt, the turrets, and then the deck, I would say, is like number 3 when it comes to these early ships. You have the turret top. This is less of a priority in the early game, but later you'd want more armor on top of the turrets. And then lastly, the secondary guns, which is also less priority. So you can see where all these affect. And again, the main area you want to focus on is this kind of middle area of the ship. Now, in the early game, as in the early eras, like 1890, 1900, you want to focus more on the sides rather than the top. And you don't really need to worry about things coming down on top of you. There's no airplanes yet. Nobody's doing like these ballistic trajectories where the rounds are going to be falling on top of you. So you mostly have to worry about getting broadsided, and having a lot of side armor is more important than top armor and so on. For the front and back, it's not as big a deal. I wouldn't put too much there because it's going to eat up a lot of your weight, but this is just for your reference, you know. Now, when it comes to guns, this is the next most important part of designing your ship. You have your main guns, which are at the top here. You also have the secondary guns and then tertiary guns, and they all have different roles. Now, in the early eras, like 1890, your main guns are not really that important. They're all pretty like low quality. You can see I have quality -2 here, and they're basically going to miss almost all the time. Even if they're quite strong, you can pick the strongest guns you have for your nation. I think Italy, the strongest or the biggest guns they have is 12-inch. But the quality is so low and you're just going to miss everything that it really doesn't even matter that much. Basically, in 1890s, the main guns you want are the secondary guns. And these are the ones that you're going to pull up next to the ship fairly close and just blast them. And both ships will basically just blast each other. That's why a lot of early ships tend to look very wonky, because they're basically just these floating fortresses that pull up beside each other and start shooting off until one of them sinks. Later in the game, you get bigger guns that can shoot from farther away, and it becomes a little bit more what you'd probably recognize as like a battleship battle from maybe like World War II or World War I, like Battle of Jutland or something like that. So yeah, 1890 and 1900, the main guns are not as important. Secondary guns are probably the main damage dealers, and the tertiary guns are more for just keeping small boats away. So like small missile boats, or around like mid-1900s, like 1910, you'll start getting destroyers. The smaller guns are more for shooting those small boats and keep them away from you. So these are important too, but again, your secondary guns are the main damage dealers. However, once you get to the dreadnought era, which is maybe before World War II, around 1910-ish, I guess. The real-life HMS Dreadnought was built in 1906. So like around that time will be the Dreadnought era. And that's when a lot of ships switched away from having these secondary and tertiary guns to just having a bunch of main guns, and very accurate, very big main guns, and focusing on more long-range combat. So once you get to that era, you can start making dreadnoughts, and the design will be a little bit different. But more or less, this is how you make the guns. You pick where you want the guns to be. You can see I have a forward gun. I have one in the back, the aft, and then one in the midship. And these are 2 guns per turret. I have the secondary guns, which are all like custom-made guns, which means they're built into the structure of the ship itself, and they stick out and shoot whatever. And the tertiary guns are just mounted all around the ship. Not much else to say about that here. You can also see the range of the guns in terms of, sorry, not the range, but the firing arc. So these white semicircles will show where my main guns can actually fire. And they can basically cover the whole ship, which is pretty nice. I probably don't need the midship gun. Basically, the front and aft can cover the ship pretty well. The midship is just there. I don't know. I just kind of put it there because I had some extra weight and I thought it would look cool. But it doesn't really matter. In these early ships, it's good to have a lot of guns anyways. Like, you just want to be blasting everybody. So just more guns, the better in the early eras. Later, you might want to focus on smaller number of guns, more focused on one area. For example, maybe if I was making a dreadnought in like the 1920s, I would put some big quad or triple guns on the front only, so I can just shoot them from far away, almost like an artillery piece. I also have torpedoes as well. Now, this ship doesn't really have many torpedoes. I have one in the back, specifically to shoot someone chasing me. So this ship is fairly slow. Maybe if another ship is chasing it, I can shoot a torpedo backwards at them to, I don't know, maybe get an easy hit. But some other ships, for example, some lighter ships, I would put more torpedoes on to be able to shoot tons of torpedoes and make use of that. Later in the game as well, once you get to later eras, you can get mine warfare, so you can add mines to the ship or even mine sweeping gear. You can add anti-submarine weapons, maybe a destroyer with some depth charges and stuff. You can have radar. Once radar comes out, you can add some flight decks or seaplanes. For example, a battleship might have its own seaplane, or obviously with a carrier, you have a big flight deck and so on. The catapults is more for carriers. And then later, like 1950s, you can add missile launchers to add nuclear tipped or other kind of missiles to your boat. So there's lots of options, but early game, you basically don't have to worry about torpedoes. All of these other ones will kind of unlock as the technology develops later. And here's, again, my battleship, the Lepanto. You can see how wonky it looks. This picture I designed myself, so you can make it look like whatever you want, basically. But it gives you a good outline of what the ship is, and if you look at like an enemy ship, these stats will kind of be the same. It tells me what armor I have on the main areas, what guns I have. I have 6 10-inch guns, 14 7-inch guns, and 16 4-inch guns, 1 torpedo tube, and the fire control is local only. That means basically whatever they can see is what they can shoot. There's no real fire control beyond just like visually aiming the guns. Alright, so we're back in the game here. This is the 1800s game I was playing. And you can see, I said I'm playing Italy. And if you look in the right top corner here, I'm actually at war with Britain right now. Now, previously I'd been kind of antagonizing Austria-Hungary. You don't really have much control over the politics in this. Basically, you're not a politician. You're like the naval commander. So the politicians make decisions. You can make decisions when it comes to certain events. So sometimes when I end my turn, a new event will come up and I can make a decision to like antagonize people or do whatever. There's like a lot of different events that have happened so far. But whatever happened, I ended up going to war with Britain, which is kind of unfortunate because Britain is very strong. I can actually click their flag and look at their fleet. So it tells me about what technology they have. Their technology is a lot better than I have. They have a lot more ships than I do. Give me a good outline of what I know about their ships. So they have a lot of more ships. 8 battleships. 6 armored cruisers, 15 light cruisers, and 8 corvettes, I think, and a lot of coastal batteries. No aircraft yet. You can see mine are much less. I have only 4 battle cruisers, 6 armored cruisers, 4 light cruisers, and 4 corvettes. However, the main difference is Britain also has a big empire. You can see Britain is everywhere. They're in North America, South America, Africa, Asia, like everywhere. So they actually have to protect all of that. For me, I only have to focus on the Mediterranean. So basically in this war, I'm focusing on pushing into Malta. If I get Malta, that'd be nice, but we'll see what I can manage. I may end up losing against Britain, but we'll see kind of how it works. Either way, this is the situation I'm in, so I kind of deal with it. I don't really want to fight Britain. Probably something, definitely Austria-Hungary I could easily take, or Spain. They're both pretty weak. France, maybe. France would be also quite hard. They do have an empire to worry about as well, but maybe I could probably take them. Britain's going to be tough, because they have a lot of forces, and they can easily bring a lot of their colonial forces in here to fuck me up, basically. But, you know, I'm going to try my best. I'll show a battle off and talk a little bit more about that in a minute. At the top here, you have a lot of options. I'm looking at the map screen, which just shows the different regions. I can zoom in or out to look in more detail at some regions. I can look at all my ships in service, which is basically this is the Italian Navy here. Some ships under construction. I have a few battleships, cruiser, and then some light cruisers. Submarines, no submarines yet. Coastal forts, these are all the forts I have in the Italian Empire. Sunken ships, nothing sunk yet. This talks about different regions. Now, I'm pretty much only in the Mediterranean and a little bit in the Indian Ocean, Eritrea. Bases, these are the bases I have, and these are my officers. Now, you can see the quality of the officer. For example, this guy, whatever his name is, Sirani, is average. This guy, Lakchi, is above average. This will have some skills. For example, this guy, Lashki, is a poor admin, and so on. So they all get abilities and things later, and you could fire them if you want to. Now, what I'd like to do quickly before I finish this video is go into a little bit of how you would start a game here. So, for example, if I was just starting, I'd probably like to go to the 1900 start. In my opinion, this is probably the most balanced and fun start. I do like the other ones too for different reasons. 1890, you can make some really janky designs, and the World War II start, you can make like a lot of carriers and a lot of more modern ships, which is pretty fun too. But 1900 is probably the most balanced and definitely the most I don't know, I guess kind of the most fun, in my opinion, era. There's no airplanes yet, no submarines really, a lot of just big ships. And if you just love like big ship battles, this is the kind of time frame you should focus on. I'd probably pick out of these nations, these are all the nations you choose from. Now, some are much harder than others. For example, a nation like China or Spain is going to be really difficult. Now, China especially is very weak in this game. Could be an option if you want like more of a challenge, but definitely this is probably the weakest nation in this game. Qing China is like collapsing at this point, only a few years away from the collapse of the Qing Empire into the rise of the Republic, so pretty rough time for China at this point. A lot of other problems too. You can see this goes through some features of China, like what guns they have researched, their dock size, some problems they have, poor education, corruption, undeveloped shipbuilding, and so on. So pretty weak. Other nations, for example, Britain is the best nation in the early game. Like this nation, Britain has the biggest navy, the most biggest budget, the most technology, and so on. So they're probably the top dog of the early game. Later in the game, the USA tends to overcome Britain, or at least equal them, and then overcome them by the time you get to like the 1950s and the post World War II era. But Britain, you can see, has a lot of things. They have a lot of guns researched. They have a lot of bonus technology, research advantage as well in these areas. They have a biggest dock size, about 1,600 tons, and the biggest budget as well, and a lot of good bonuses like naval power, tech leader, efficient shipbuilding, and stuff like that. However, I don't know if I'd pick Britain as a good nation for like a starting player. I mean, Britain's very powerful, and you have a lot of things you can do, but because Britain has such a huge empire, as I showed earlier, you have a lot of responsibilities as well, and it can be a little bit overwhelming, I think. I don't really like playing Britain that much. I mean, it is pretty fun if you want to play like the real kind of top dog nation. But in terms of something a bit more fun for like a new player, I'd probably focus on some of the other nations. For example, I think France, Germany, and Italy are all great options. France is kind of like the number 2 power in the early game, like 1880s and 1900s. France is kind of like the number 2 guy. They're the second biggest navy. They have a pretty good budget. They have good research as well. They have a lot of like things researched. They have a pretty big navy as well. Their navy is, I think, the second largest after Britain at this point. And so they're a pretty good option as well. They also have some colonies, so if you want to kind of get into that colonial game, they do have some colonies available, but they also have a very strong European fleet to focus mostly on European battles. So you have a lot of options available for you. You can go the colonial game and try to pick up some other colonies, have some colonial battles with other colonial nations like Britain or Spain, or you can really, really focus on Europe only and try to counter some rivals here again, maybe Britain or Russia or Germany, for example. Italy is a great option. I really love Italy in this game. As I said before, you can really focus on just the Mediterranean, turn that into the Mare Nostrum, your sea. You can really tailor your fleet for the Mediterranean only. So, for example, making ships that maybe are not that great in the open ocean, but can be really effective in the small Mediterranean sea there. So you can really focus on one area only and try to make your own little Mediterranean, Neo-Roman Empire and so on. Germany is also good. In the early game, Germany is pretty limited in terms of their navy. They have a pretty small navy, but they can build up very quickly. They have a big budget. And around this time is the time when both Britain and Germany were having a bit of an arms race in terms of like building dreadnoughts and building up a large naval force. So this is probably the best time to play as Germany as well. You get to do a big build-up. You get to really pump yourself up from being kind of a mid-rate power to one of the top-tier powers of the game. And you could very easily take out Britain if you build up enough. So this is a pretty fun game as well. Germany's like a rising power. Another good option is the USA. USA is kind of like I'd say the easiest nation for a new player. You go all the way from in 1880 being a little tiny naval power to by the late game, the number 1 naval power in the world. USA has a lot of research advantage. You can play the colonial game. You can focus on North America, South America only. Once you get your navy a little bit bigger, you can even intervene in Europe as well. So you have so many options in the USA and a lot of fun things you can do with them. So this is a good option too. Japan's okay as well. You're mostly focused on Asia, which is a little bit limited because you don't really have that many rivals. Basically just some European colonies and China's pretty weak. But, Japan's pretty fun as well, and you can build up to the late game. I prefer playing Japan around the 1920s or 1930s when you can build up for that battle with the USA or the other kind of great powers in the world. So I do like Japan, but I prefer them more in like the 1920s start rather than in the early game like this. Russia's pretty fun as well, but it does have some problems with being blockaded. I mean, if you know anything about Russian history, they're pretty limited in terms of warm water ports. In this game, you basically only have the Baltic Sea as your option for ports. So it's very easy to be blockaded there, and you will suffer a lot from being blocked into your little sea zone. But still, Russia could have some good options as well, especially once you get to the Soviet Union. Into the late game, you can do some kind of fun people's navy and kind of things like that. Other options too, Spain I mentioned is pretty difficult. Spain is basically collapsing as an empire at this point. They do have some colonies like in the Philippines and Cuba, but almost always get picked apart by Japan or by Britain or by America, and very, very weak, but definitely a challenge if you want something like that. And Austria-Hungary is also a pretty weak nation. They have something similar to Italy where they only really need to focus on the Mediterranean, but they're much, much weaker than Italy and France, which is the other kind of big Mediterranean power. So they really have to kind of play that game a little bit of trying to balance these two out so they can build enough of their force and eventually push out into the Mediterranean and hopefully push out the other Mediterranean powers. In my opinion, I think Italy is a good nation for a new player because you can focus on your little area, your little sea. So let's pick Italy. When I'm starting, you can pick your name. So
And now we're off the hook, me boys, and the land is white with snow.
you can pick the name of your commander and then your fleet size. Now this shows like how many ships you will have in your fleet. I'd say for a new player, and I tend to like either medium or small. Small is kind of more fun. You can focus on one or two ships, and it's like a smaller set of ships, and really like get attached to them a little bit more. Basically, this tailors the whole game to be kind of equivalent to you. So if I select small here, all the other countries are going to be about equivalent naval size. If I want something more realistic, probably the large or like super large are probably more what realistic navies would have been like. There's some other options, for example, historical resources. This is, again, to have a more realistic game mode. You can have the resources available to your nation. Research rate, I can increase it if I want to be able to research things faster, or decrease it. Actually, I can't increase it, but I can decrease it if I want to, if I don't want to worry about like airplanes or other things like that, I can lower the research rate quite a lot, so it'll take much longer to research the new technology, and I can stick with my big old battleships for a lot longer. Tech variation, I can either do none, so basically technology only appears when it did in real life. I can do slight, so there's some variation, or I can do considerable, which means you might get some technologies way earlier, way later, and so on. Other things as well, like I can specifically set slow aircraft development. If I don't really want to worry about airplanes, I just want to worry about my boats, I can do that. That's if you want to keep the research rate the same, but you just don't want airplanes. This is some stuff about air bases, and specifically for the 1900 start, you have the manual build of legacy fleet. So I'm going to click that. I'm also going to click the game 2, so I don't overwrite my other game as Italy. Alright, so I need to build an existing fleet. I'll go over some ideas specifically for your main ships. The other ships, like the light cruisers and stuff, are not that big a deal, but I'll go over a good option for maybe a battleship, maybe an armor cruiser. So let's start by designing our battleship. Let's get a Dreadnought. Do I have Dreadnought researched already? I think I do, but just general battleship. I'm not sure if Dreadnoughts are available yet. Are they available yet? Yeah, they are. Okay, so I can make a Dreadnought by now. So let's do that. Oh, sorry, I can only make a pre-Dreadnought. I can't make a Dreadnought yet. Alright, so still Dreadnoughts are not available yet, so I can make the pre-Dreadnought battleship. Again, I'm going to click the auto-complete just to give me something to start with. This will kind of automatically make a ship for me. Alright, I can adjust that however I want though. So, for example, if I want to make a battleship, I want to think about a few things that I want. Let's go through some of the armor first. So I want quite a lot of armor on it. Maybe a 9's a bit overkill. Maybe around 8 is good. I want to pay attention to what my guns can actually penetrate. So these 10-inch guns, can I go bigger than that? Do I have 11-inch? I can do 12-inch. So I kind of want to go the biggest guns that are still at least quality -1. Anything bigger than that, I don't even have anything bigger than that. But if I have quality -2, that's going to really hurt them a lot. So I think 12 caliber is pretty good. Just 2 times 2 is pretty good. So 2 turrets with 2 guns in each turret is pretty nice. And then the front and back. This will give me a good coverage all around. So what can actually penetrate? Let's look at around 6,000 meters out, or I don't know if this is meters or feet, but this is about the range you'll be encountering enemies. But you can see, obviously close range I can pierce 8 inches, but around this range I can only pierce about 7 to 6 inches, so about 8 inches of armor. Belt armor is pretty good. Maybe what else I can do on the turrets, I probably want them about the same. Maybe I can go 9, I don't know, I can go 9, I guess. Let's go 9 for turrets. That'll give me pretty good coverage. That means even with like 1,000, they won't be able to penetrate that easily. For the other areas, I don't know about that. Let's see, extended belt. I guess this is okay. I'll keep it pretty light. Upper belt too. Maybe I'll lower the upper belt a little bit. I don't need it that thick. I need to cut down the weight. I'm pretty low. Actually, I could probably increase the displacement quite a bit. This is a pretty small ship. I want to make this a little bit bigger. Maybe like 13. That's pretty good. Maybe lower that later if I need to, but I'll leave it at that for now. Let's do 2,500. All right, extended deck. I don't know if I really need to worry about the deck that much. The deck, I think I'll put up to a little bit more, around 4 maybe. Okay, I think that's pretty good. I'll leave everything else around 2 or 1. The deck doesn't really matter in this era. As I said, you're mostly going to be being hit from the side, not from above, because basically they can only hit you from close range for the most part. So you're mostly going to be taking hits on the side of your ship. Now, in the case of Italy, let's see, what can I do? I'm going to lower the secondary guns. I guess just leave it at 1. Everything else I'll leave at 2. The turrets I'll keep at 9. Conning tower I'm going to lower a little bit, maybe to like 4. It doesn't need to be that high. You should have some protection though to avoid your commander getting blown up. I'll keep at the slope deck. I can pick what type of deck. For a battleship like this, I think slope deck is probably the best. Torpedo defense, I don't think I have any yet. Now, because I'm playing as Italy, now for some nations I might want to do a longer range, but because I'm going to be focusing mostly on the Mediterranean, I'm going to click short. This means these ships will have a hard time going to other seas and fighting in faraway areas. But basically, I don't want these guys to go anywhere except the Mediterranean. I might also set the accommodation to cramped. This means the crew has very small space available, but because they're mostly going to be staying in the Mediterranean, doesn't matter that much. This is more of a problem if your ships are going far away and fighting in like foreign oceans or something like that. Then you want to have a little bit more space for your crew. I'm going to go cramped for now. It doesn't really matter that much, and that saves me some weight. For the freeboard, this is basically how much of the ship is above the water. For a ship that will be going in like the Atlantic or Pacific Ocean, I might click normal. But because these are mostly going to be sitting in the Mediterranean, which is a little bit calmer, and you're not going to be going as far, I'm going to actually put low. This will mean it's harder to actually hit the side of the ship. And I won't have to worry as much about damage. So I have a lot of weight remaining. I think that gives me some range to increase the speed a little bit. I think I'm going to go around 19. That's pretty good. So this is pretty fast for this era. In the early eras, around 18, 19, 20 is pretty good for a battleship. Maybe for smaller ships, you might go up to like 22, 23, maybe 24 if you can afford it. But I'll go 19. This is pretty fast for a battleship. So I think that's pretty good for the armor and displacement. Now let's take a look at the guns. So I went over the main guns already. Fire control, I do have some basic fire control available, so I'll keep that there. And for the amount of rounds per gun, I guess it doesn't really matter much for your big guns. Again, it's still more the secondary guns that could be doing a lot of the work. I think 6 inches is about good, but I do want more than that. So let's go up to 16 guns if I can manage it. So pretty close on the weight. I may actually have to increase the displacement of my ship a little bit. So 16 guns. So something like this is pretty good. 6 inches is good enough for the secondary guns. They're mostly going to be shooting at close range. If I want to see a little bit more about the gun data, I can actually put these down to 6. We can see what their penetration is. So around close range, they'll be penetrating about 2 to 4 inches, depending how close you are. But this is not absolute. It's not like they can't penetrate anything thicker, or once it's like thinner than that, it'll just go right through. It's obviously a little bit more like real life, where the armor will dampen the effect of the hit. And you can also use armor-piercing rounds and explosive rounds, so on like that. But this is pretty good. About 6 inches. Maybe I can go a bit bigger than that, but I think 6 is fine. I don't want to increase the weight too much. And 16 of them, because these ones are the ones that are going to be doing the most damage, basically. Could I go for 2? Maybe 2 guns per turret? That might be a little bit better. Will that save me more weight? Yeah, that'll save me a little bit of weight, so maybe I'll do that, actually. So these will all be in turrets. That way they'll be able to rotate and hit around the ship a little bit more. Lastly, the tertiary guns. These ones are not that important. As I mentioned before, these are more for like shooting off destroyers and stuff like that. I think I'll keep these about the same. These ones don't matter that much. Maybe I can increase it a little bit to 4. No, I guess I'll leave that the same. These ones are not as important. Again, these are mostly just for shooting off destroyers and keeping them off your back. For torpedoes, I'm actually not going to add that many torpedoes here. For battleships, I usually just like to have one aft torpedo, and that's about it. So this is pretty good. Everything else we don't have to worry about really yet. I'm not going to be making this one a minesweeper or anything like that. So this is pretty good for my pre-dreadnought. I can pick a name too, or just type whatever name I want. Let's call this the Italia class. And that's good. That's my battleship done. And I have quite a bit of weight remaining. I can lower this a little bit. Yeah, that's good. I do want to have some weight remaining because this gives me extra buoyancy and means it'll be a little bit harder to sink. So I think that's pretty good. And this is not too expensive either. So here, this column tells me the weight. This one tells me the price. It'll take 31 months to complete and cost about 1,400 per month to actually finish it. So let's save and finish. Let's build a couple of these. How many can I afford? Maybe I can build 3 of these. So we'll build the Italia and 2 others. Now that cost me a lot. I'm still making quite a bit of money, but you can see I'm making 3 ships now, ships in service. That's 3 at the moment. Basically I have to use up all my funds to build this. This is building my initial fleet. Next I want to make a cruiser. So let's go make an armored cruiser. I'm going to just auto-generate. Amerigo Vespucci, that's a good name. So let's think about what would be a good armored cruiser. So let's start with the guns. I think for the main guns, I may go... Can I go 10? Yeah, I have quality 1. I want to get at least quality -1. I don't want to go into like quality -2 or anything. But since as Italy, I can afford that, so I'm going to go do that. So let's get the same forward and aft 2x2 10-inch guns. For the secondary guns, I think I'll do 6 again, but let's go about 12. Like that, that'll be good. Oh, let's increase the number of rounds a little bit, maybe around 200. I should have done that around for the other ship, but I think I forgot about that. And what else? I guess the tertiary guns I'll keep the same. Just kind of leave it like that. What else can I do? Let's still go through the armor. So I'm going to do the same kind of idea. The freeboard, maybe I'll leave that low. These are only going to be operating in the Mediterranean. Maybe I should go normal, actually. Let's do range. This will be short as well. Speed a little bit faster, around 23 knots. And I'm also going to focus on speed. I think that's pretty good. Let's keep that there. These engine options, speed means your ship can go faster, but your engine might break down more. Reliability, your ship will be a little bit slower, but less likely to break down. So basically, this is, do you want to be... do you want to be like a normal car? Do you want to be an Italian car? Do you want to be a German car? So these are your options. I'm going to go, since I'm Italian, I'm going to go Italian car. Let's go through the armor as well. For the belt, I'm going to do a little bit less than that. I think I'll cut it pretty low. I want this to be pretty fast. Let's go 2 inches here. For the belt, I think, what did I put in the other one? I put 8. Let's put 4. Whatever it was in the last one, the battleship, I'm going to do about half that here. So about 4 here, 4 here. Let's do 2 here. All right, here, I'm going to cut the deck down a little bit. Now you can see the deck gives me a lot of weight. The deck is a huge area, so I want to cut down the size of the ship a little bit more to make it a bit more affordable. So let's cut down to like, way more. Like that, maybe like 1,000. Okay, that's pretty good. So maybe something like that is a little bit better. Ooh, it's looking pretty cramped. I can also change the graphics of everything. But for example, if I want my ship to look pretty crazy, I can do something like really nasty like that. So let's make it all bright pink. Actually, let's do something funny. Let's make it truly Italian. There. So our perfect Italian ship. So very nice here. That's pretty nice. Okay, there we go. So yeah, you can do whatever you want in terms of design. This looks really dumb, but again, whatever you want to do for the graphics, this whole panel just lets you mod the graphics and do whatever you want. So this has no effect on the ship itself. This is just if you're really autistic and want to go into detail about this. So I think it's pretty good. I don't need to do much else. Actually, I'm going to add a few more torpedoes. So let me add a few more actually. Pretty nice. So I think that's okay. Let's leave it at that. There are a lot of ships. And then I can go through the rest of my ship design as well. For the other ones, it's less important. For the light cruisers, those are kind of awkward. You can make them kind of fill whatever role you want. In the early game, I kind of like to have them fill the same role a destroyer might have. Just give them lots of torpedoes, make them really fast, and just kind of fast attack boats. For the Corvettes, they're more for coastal defense and things like that. It really depends what you want to do. Mainly the battleships and the armored cruisers are your main ships for most of the early game, so I'd focus on these two. The other ships, you can kind of do whatever you want. So I hope you guys didn't find this game too daunting. I think it's not that hard to get into once you get over the UI design, which, to be honest, is pretty easy to follow. It's very like classic Windows XP, Windows 98 kind of style. So once you kind of learn what's what and learn a little bit about, ship design, things like that, it's pretty intuitive. I think it's pretty fun to follow. If you guys like this, I might do a follow-up talking more about tactical battles and how actually the battle map actually works. But for now, I think I'm going to end it here. But either way, guys, I'll see you guys again next time. So goodbye, guys.